Experimental research. Experimental research is a scientific methodology of understanding relationships between two or more variables. These sets include dependent variables and independent variables. An experiment is a carefully designed procedure to answer a question or test a hypothesis. For example, a hamburger store changes its packaging while keeping everything else, ingredients, flavor, etc., the same to observe the effect of the new packaging on sales. When we use experimental research, you can conduct experimental research in the following situations. Time is a vital factor in establishing a relationship between cause and effect. In variable behavior between cause and effect, you wish to understand the importance of cause and effect. Key terms to know. The dependent variable is the effect that the experimenter is measuring. If a researcher was investigating how sleep influences test scores, for example, the test scores would be the dependent variable. The independent variable is the variable that the experimenter manipulates. In the previous example, the amount of sleep an individual gets would be the independent variable. A hypothesis is a tentative statement or a guess about the possible relationship between two or more variables. In looking at how sleep influences test scores, the researcher might hypothesize that people who get more sleep will perform better on a math test the following day. The purpose of the experiment, then, is to either support or reject this hypothesis. Demand characteristics are subtle hints that indicate what an experimenter is hoping to find in a psychology experiment. This can sometimes cause participants to alter their behavior, which can affect the results of the experiment. Extraneous variables are other variables that may also affect the outcome of an experiment. Intervening variables are factors that can affect the relationship between two other variables. Confounding variables are variables that can affect the dependent variable, but that experimenters cannot control for. The experimental group, also known as the treatment group, receives treatment whose effect the researchers want to study. A control group is a group in the experiment which a variable is not being tested, such as a test subject that does not receive any treatment. Operationalize, to make the hypothesis testable and measurable. Ensure you have written your variables in your hypothesis in a way that someone else can read and repeat your experiment. Stages of experimental method in psychology. The experiment has several fixed steps that are usually carried out in a lab setting. Identify the topic of interest and form a hypothesis. Identify the IV and DV, determine the design and type of experiment, and determine how to measure the IV and DV, like self-report measure, observations, etc. Prepare the materials needed in the study and recruit participants through an appropriate sampling method. Conduct the experiment in a carefully planned scientific manner, collect the data and statistically analyze the results. Write up the lab report, evaluate the study and give suggestions for further research. Experimental method example. A hypothetical study has been described below to show how the experimental method is used in psychology research. The researchers researched previously published work on the effects of caffeine on reaction times. The researchers hypothesized that drinking caffeine would affect reaction times based on the previous findings. The researchers identified reaction time as the DV and caffeine as the IV. They decided to carry out the study in a lab setting. The next stage involved preparing a test that measured reaction times, and participants were randomly assigned to three groups: drink with high levels of caffeine, drink with low levels of caffeine and no caffeine. The study was then carried out in a manner to prevent the reliability and validity of the study from being lowered. The results of the study were written up in the correct psychology format. The features of the experimental method. Empirical research means that the findings should be reflective of objective facts that the researcher has observed rather than their subjective opinion. Reliability refers to how consistent the results of an experiment are. If the results are similar when the same procedure has been carried out on different occasions, settings, or using different participants, then the findings will be considered reliable. Validity is how well a test measures what it intends to. For example, if a test claims it measures personality type but instead measures emotion level, it cannot be a valid test. Impartiality, the researcher should ensure that their subjective opinion does not influence the research. Methodology and analysis to ensure research is valid. Researchers can try and combat this through random allocation. Participants are randomly assigned to the experimental or control group. This is used to ensure that individual differences do not cause the results. Single or double-blind technique, the researcher is unaware of which experimental condition the participants are in. This prevents the researcher from giving subconscious hints that may influence the participants' behavior. Don't forget to subscribe for more.